is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Novice by Trudy Canavan, Book 2 in the Black Magician Trilogy. Brought to you by Ashleigh. In these 3 chapters, everything has started to get just a little bit worse for Sonea, and there is something real weird going on with Akkarin. I mean, what is he out there doing? Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. My name is Natasha, and these 3 chapters were full of surprises. Not, unfortunately, surprised by Sonea being picked on even more by her peers, because Regin seems like he has a real knack for knowing how to manipulate people. He's really good. And so he has managed to do something that I feel is is the thing that a lot of bullies get wrong, which is he has made friends with people and made them want to be on his side rather than bullying everybody so that they're all afraid of him and all secretly want him to be taken down somehow. So he's made himself into the good guy adequately enough that if she were to retaliate against him in any way, he would have the backing of the entire class. And most bullies really, it's often not about everybody being on their side. It's often not about making friends. It's about, I just want to feel better than you in this moment, so I'm going to be opportunistic about it, often when there are no other people around to stop me. But he has the much uglier version where it's, I don't care if there are people around because they all think the same thing that I do because I've told them what I want them to think and I'm influential and likable enough for them to take my word for it. So that's pretty ugly. And she's thinking to herself how glad she is when the chapter opens that it's free day the next day because she's not going to have to deal with any of them. But it's alarming to her how long it feels like it's been, even though it has been, several days? Considering how little she'd done in the past week. Yeah. So it's Friday, which I'm wondering if that's supposed to be free day, Friday, if there's, but Issel no longer acknowledged Sonea's presence at all. And while this was better than open hostility, it seemed all of the novices had decided this was the best way to treat her too. None of them would speak to her, even if she asked a sensible question about their lessons. Which, being ignored is, it's the kind of thing where there's a fine line, especially if you're Sonea and you kind of want to be left alone. Obviously, if people are just going to ignore you, for example, you pass them in the hall and they act like you're not there, or you're in the bathroom together and they act like they don't see you, or that kind of thing, I feel like would not be a big deal. But when you're directly talking to a group of people and they all collectively decide to agree not to see you standing there talking to them, that's pretty rough. I really, that feels like more than being ignored. The words being ignored to me sound a little bit more benign than that. So she considered each of the novices. Ilake was everything she'd been told to expect of a typical Lonmar male. Brought up in a world where women were hidden away, living a life of luxury but little freedom, he was unused to talking to them, and treated Bina and Issel with the same cold indifference. Farron, the thief who had hidden her from the guild last year, had been nothing like this, but then Farron was definitely not a typical Lonmar. And she talks about some of the others, and that one of them actually said to her, the girl, Bina, I'm not allowed to talk to you. Which then she like thinks back about what Bina's mother was saying about her during the induction ceremony. And she's like, oh yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. Which I feel like there's a little bit more comfort to be had in the situation with Bina, where it's like, okay, she was determined from the start to not be my friend because of instructions from her parents, which, while rather pathetic, is a lot more understandable versus, for example, what happened with Issel, where it seemed like we could have been friends and then she abandoned me because of pressure from friends, which is just like, you almost had her, you know. It's like it's way more frustrating because if he had just not stepped in when he did, you might have had one friend, and one friend in a fairly influential position. But as we know, that does not work out. And there's also a little note I like about how all the boys are talking to each other and like bragging about the experiences with women that they've had. And she's thinking to herself that like she's been around this kind of behavior before, of course, with all the boys that she used to be friends with, but that they went through this phase of like bragging when obviously nothing had happened way earlier. And that it must, like, all of her male friends who are only slightly older than this crowd have plenty more experience, obviously, than any of these boys do. Which makes sense because they're all being, you know, closely watched by parents and guardians and God knows what else. What do you call people who are like instructing you on how to be in this sort of like somebody who like works at a finishing school, but you know, privately? I'm trying to think if there's like a name for that sort of person. I need to watch The Princess Diaries, I think is what I'm realizing. So I'm going to go ahead and get on that and I'll get right back to you guys. So she gets like scooped up on the way back to her rooms and told that she's going to be on kitchen duty. And I'm going to be straight honest with you guys here. If I were Sonea, I would 100% have fallen for this. Like, the kid sort of grimacing when she says that she doesn't even know about it and being like, oh, well, yeah, that makes sense, I guess, since Regin is the one that has the syllabus for it or the chart for it, that it makes sense that he wouldn't have told you about it because we know that you two don't like each other. So the fact that he reacts that way in like acknowledgement of their enmity and sort of is almost like a little apologetic about it, it really got me. Like it really, I have way too much faith in people. So she goes back down to the kitchens and I know that she was told that the novices they have to do a lot of little like chores and stuff. So it didn't bother me, the idea of her working in the kitchens. It didn't seem ridiculous. And once she thinks about it and she's like, of course they wouldn't have students from great houses working in the kitchens. I was like, but wouldn't they? Like, because he specifically says, and by him I mean Rothan in the first book, that they do the jobs that pretty much nobody else wants to do. But I guess there's a difference between like scholarly sort of chores and the actual functions of the school itself. For example, one of the chores is, if we're going to go with like Harry Potter standards, maybe you have to sit down and chop up mandrake roots for 20 minutes or something because the teacher's going to be teaching a mandrake class tomorrow. But having to go and clean the toilets, which is something that's absolutely necessary to the function of the school, is not going to be on the list of things that you're asked to do. So once she stopped and pointed that out, I was like, oh, you know what? Okay, that makes sense. But in the moment, I was functioning with the interpretation of the way the kid reacted and the fact that I knew that they were meant to do chores. So I just totally fell for it. And when she winds up in there and the way that they pick on her, it's so upsetting because of the fact that the servants are obviously taken in by it as well. So I'm going to read this section. Let's see. I'm sorry to have bothered you. I think I've just fallen for a joke. Sonea turned, a sick feeling growing inside because she hears them start laughing. Oh, no, you're not leaving, Regin declared. You can stay in there with the servants where you belong. But now I consider it, that's not right. Even servants are better than slum dwellers. He turned to the kitchen woman. I'd watch out if I were you. She's a thief, and she'll admit it if you ask. I'd watch she doesn't sneak off with one of your knives, then stab you in the back when you're not looking. With that, he reached for the door handle and pulled it closed. Sonea strode over and twisted the handle, but while it turned easily, the door would not open. So they're using magic to close it, even though they haven't passed second level yet, which she finds really puzzling. And I am wondering if there isn't somebody who's like better at magic, that's more advanced, that's like palling up with them. So she interprets it as that Regin is the one that's like closing the door because he's not talking and laughing with everybody. So she thinks that probably he can't talk and laugh because all of his focus is on keeping the door shut. I want to believe her, but based on the fact that he doesn't do well with lighting the candle later, I'm not entirely sure that he could have managed this. And the only thing I can think is that does he use more magic better and more effectively when he's fucking tormenting her than he does in class because he's so focused and like driven to make her life miserable? That would actually make sense. That's fucked up. So then she turns to the servant woman that she was talking to when she first came in. There must be another way out of here. Would you show me out? The woman hesitated. Her expression held no sympathy anymore, just suspicion. The sick feeling inside Sonea turned into anger. Well, she snapped. The woman's eyes widened, then her gaze dropped to the floor. Yes, my lady, follow me. That's the part that makes me so mad. Is that like, at least she had Tanya, the servant for Rothan, on her side. So I was kind of hoping that she'd low-key have the support of all the servants because they were going to see her as a sort of champion that like she's from lower classes, but she still managed to get into the guild and she's really sticking it to all these rich bastards. But no, Regin is so effective that he's even managed to turn the people that should support Sonea most against her out of just pure fear. It's a real fucking commentary, isn't it? So yeah, that just bummed me out, man. Like, Jesus Christ. What kind of instinct must you have as a person that when you're genuinely like invested in your class and want to do well because it's the name of your family and your own advancement that is on the line, what does it say about you that that's not enough motivation to get you to focus, but tormenting someone that you don't know for fun completely focuses you like nothing else ever has? Like, and what does it say when your talent, and I'm not talking about magic, I'm talking about he obviously has an uncanny, like, sixth sense about exactly what to say to whom in order to get what he wants. And that's the part that makes me so frustrated, is that somebody with these kinds of talents, if they chose to use them for good, I mean, what amazing differences they could make. And he is utterly uninterested in good. Like, he probably thinks that he is on the side of good because good equals rich, right? So Rothan has started to go to the night room alone, and there is something going on with Rothen too. Where once he had half dreaded attending the weekly social gathering for the rush of questions he was subjected to about the mysterious slum girl, now he found himself ignored. So, yikes. It really did not occur to me that Rothen was going to start suffering the same social consequences, indirectly, of course, as Sonea. He's not getting food poured down the front of his robes. But, you know, like, that's really... you know what? I'm going to say something maybe a little shitty here, but I mean it. Maybe this is good for him. Because as much as he may know intellectually that she's going through this sort of thing, I really don't think Rothen appreciated just how bad this situation would be for her. I mean, he says himself later that he told her if he sort of tutored her on how to speak, that even if most of them didn't accept her, she'd at least have a couple of friends. And that hasn't happened. Like, he admits that things are going worse than he expected. So I like that that it seems as if he's experiencing that a little bit more in a visceral way. But in addition to that, I feel like this might be good for him because he has really tended to only see the best in everybody. Which is an admirable trait, but can blind you to the truth. And it's very clear that Fergan, who was about to murder somebody, like, he kept this kid prisoner and was threatening to kill him, and I really don't doubt would have if things didn't work out in his favor, because what else is he going to do with him? Let him go? I doubt it. He was about to do that, but the punishment that he got was simply being sent away. There's no... I mean, unless he was sent away to an actual prison, a real prison. A fort is sort of... It could mean prison, it could mean a lot of things. I feel like that shows how little they value human life if it is not a magician or noble life. And he doesn't appreciate just how pervasive that mindset is. I think that Rothen would like to believe that Fergan is the worst of the bunch and that now he's gone, everybody else will start to behave like humans. But he really doesn't understand how many people agree with Fergan's point of view and just don't say so. And I also think that he underestimates what people are willing to do about that if they sense other people are also in agreement with them. Which, again, does this sound familiar at all, guys? Because, like, this is the entire thing that's going on in our country right now, is people who think really, like, classist, racist, shitty things about other people and keep it to themselves until enough folks start acting out and speaking up that they realize that they're not going to be alone. And then they feel free to let loose with their garbage opinions. So while it bums me out to see that Rothen's being sort of ostracized by his own crew, I can't help but think that this is the only way he's going to learn what the guild is really like from Sonea's perspective. And it's probably in the end going to be a good thing. But he overhears, like, he takes a seat in the night room in a spot that Dannyl earlier was apparently telling him was the perfect place to sit because you could just overhear so many conversations from the acoustics of the room and where it is positioned. So a couple of the teachers are saying that Aline girl will need watching. From what Lady Kinla said, it won't be long before she needs a private talk with a healer. The reply was inaudible. Bina? Perhaps. Or do you mean... No. Who would want to? Leave it to Rothen. So, when they say it won't be long before she needs a private talk with a healer, are they talking about she's going to need somebody to pretend her into being a virgin again? Forgive me, but that's 100% where I'm going with this, because They're saying she needs watching in this sort of way, like, oops, she's going to be trouble. Private talk with a healer feels like they're talking about lady matters. And it could be like, I don't know, just about like menstruation, but they're supposed to be all like 15. Most girls have started to menstruate by that time. So I don't feel like that's it. And it seems like the sort of like, oh, she's in trouble. Like, not, oh, we're going to have to watch her because she's the right age. It sounds more like a behavioral tone. Like, oh God, that one. So I feel like maybe they're watching her with Regin and thinking that like the two of them might fool around and then they're going to need to like, cover her reputation for her. And that's like, I'm just completely spitballing here. I may be so off base, but I'm real curious to find out who would want to leave it to Rothen. Yeah, I don't know what that means, but hearing his name, Rothen searched for the speakers. He found 2 young healer women standing by a window nearby. One glanced up and, seeing him watching, blushed and looked away. There's something strange about her. It's something... Recognizing this new voice, Rothen felt a thrill of triumph. The speaker was Lord Elbin, one of Sonea's teachers. Louder, closer conversations in the room threatened to overwhelm the voice, but Rothen closed his eyes and concentrated as Dannyl had taught him to. She doesn't fit in, a wavering voice replied, but who really expected her to? Rothen frowned. The second speaker was the history teacher for the first-year novices. It's more than that, Scorin, Elbin insisted. She's too quiet. She doesn't even talk to the other novices. They don't like her much either, do they? A wry laugh. No, who can blame them? Think of Lord Rothen, Scorin said, the poor man. Do you think he knew what he was getting into? I wouldn't want her coming back to my rooms every night. Geralt was telling me she spun some tale about knifing a man when she lived in the slums. I wouldn't want a little murderess lurking around my rooms while I was asleep. Charming. I hope Rothen keeps his door locked during the night in that case. The voices faded as the pair moved away. Rothen opened his eyes and looked down at his glass of wine. Dannyl had been right. This chair was in a good position for listening to other magicians' conversations. Dannyl had always said the regular night room attendees were too eager to express their opinions to check who might be listening, and much could be learned from them. Unlike Dannyl, however, Rothen felt uncomfortable spying on his fellow magicians. He rose and located Scorin and Elbin. Forcing a polite smile, he approached the pair. Good evening, Lord Elbin, he said, inclining his head in greeting. Lord Scorin, I just came to ask how my little thief is going. The 2 teachers paused, their faces blank with surprise. Then Elbin laughed nervously. She's doing well. In fact, she's doing better than I expected. She learns fast, and her control over her powers is quite advanced. She had many months in which to practice, and we haven't really tested her strength yet, Scorin added. Rothen smiled. Few had believed him when he had described how strong Sonea was, despite knowing that a magician had to be strong for their powers to surface of their own accord. I look forward to hearing your opinion when you do test her, he said, stepping away. Before you go, Scorin lifted a wrinkled hand, I'd like to know how well my grandson Erlin is progressing in chemistry. So he starts to wonder to himself, like, she's being bullied by kids, but is she being bullied by her teachers as well? And it doesn't sound from this conversation like that's necessarily happening yet, but I could see it happening because as much as we want to pretend that teachers are above this sort of thing a lot of the time, teachers are just as susceptible to the peer pressure and whims of a crowd as anyone. And there are an astonishing number of teachers that I have seen start to believe whatever garbage the crowd in the class that seems to have power is parroting to their friends. There's 2 things that can happen here. One, there are teachers that are going to believe what they're hearing because they figure that the majority, if they all hate somebody, that person probably deserves it in some way. And so they're going to believe what they hear. And then there are going to be the teachers who don't care if it's true or not. And either A, had really sad, pathetic careers themselves in high school and are trying to sort of like scrape back some semblance of that by becoming friends with the popular kids as adults, which is the most pathetic thing. And I've seen it in person and it's awful. Or B, the teacher will know that the student's parents are very influential and pissing off the parents is a bad idea. So they'll take the kid's side simply for the sake of the connections that it will make for them. So I feel like this is a pretty political situation in this school and city. And I just think that's probably the more likely scenario, is that like whether or not this shit is actually true might be irrelevant to a lot of them. They know everybody else believes it and is going to be treating her a certain way. So they're just going to do that in order to make their own position better and solidified. So then we go to Lorelyn. And Lorelyn is going to see Akkarin. It's like, this is one of those conversations that I can't decide how much of it just means what it means and how much of it is like subtext, because I can't tell if Akkarin realizes that something is going on. I don't think he has any idea that Lorelyn knows what he's up to, but I can't entirely decide. And Lorelyn has to go and visit him because he's been away much longer than he normally is from his friend. I guess he like goes and visits him usually like at least once a week, and it's been a couple weeks and he hasn't been. So when he shows up, Akkarin is really surprised to see him, and it's like, wow, I almost didn't recognize you. It's been so long. And Lorelyn keeps, tries to keep his cool and be chill, but like he's so paranoid about trying to act normal that I can't help but think he's making it worse. And Akkarin says something about how Dannyl was an interesting choice for guild ambassador for Eileen. And Lorelyn sort of starts to panic and is like, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. And says, is that not the choice that you would have made? And Akkarin says he's an excellent man for the role. He showed initiative and boldness by seeking and negotiating with the thieves. I really like this interaction because Lorelyn says, well, he should have consulted us first. And Akkarin says the higher magicians would have argued about it for weeks, then made the safest decision, and they would have made the wrong one. That Dannyl could see that, and risked the disapproval of his peers for the sake of finding her, shows that he is not easily cowed by authority when its methods are contrary to the good of others. He will need that confidence when dealing with the Eileen court. I was surprised you didn't ask my opinion, but I'm sure you knew that I'd approve of your decision. So, first of all, what the fuck, Akkarin? Like, the whole, oh, well, he knew what the right thing to do was for the sake of everybody, and he knew that we would just hem and haw over whether or not this was okay, and decided to go ahead and do the right thing without our approval, and frankly, good, because the bureaucracy here can just slow everybody down from making better choices and more risky choices that potentially could pay off big. Well, that's interesting. I can't help but wonder what that might mean for him. Like, this raises the question for me. The way that he phrases this definitely feels like a reference to his own mindset, basically, which is that I'm going to ask forgiveness rather than permission. What exactly is he up to that he thinks is for the good of everyone? Because I'm operating under the assumption that he really believes that he's making the right decision simply without the permission of the guild because he knows that they would just slow him down. I don't know that he feels the same way about what he's doing as he does about what Dannyl did. But there's something about the way that he phrases this whole thing that makes me think that has to be it. And I just don't know, like, you know, what is he, like, absorbing all of this power? And we'll talk about what he's doing to get it later. Like, is he absorbing this power to do something to help people? I don't feel like we've seen any evidence of, like, huge goings on that are inexplicable, but that have led to, like, better crop yields or, you know, I don't know, whatever. But I feel like that was a really significant little monologue that he had there. And then we have the fucking people who are asking if Fergan can come home. Guys, I don't know why I didn't expect this, but I really didn't. I expected Fergan to be disgraced. And for everybody to be like, we're just going to pretend that never happened, and pretend we don't know that guy, and send him as far away as we can so that we don't have to think about him because he disgraced the name of the guild. I'd be wrong. Because he says, Neffin of House Marin asked if Fergan could come back to Imardin now. Again? This is the first time Neffin is asked. The last one to ask was Gainan, about 3 weeks ago. It seems every man and woman in House Marin intends to approach me about this. I've even had children ask me when they'll see Uncle Farron again. So what did you tell him? That Uncle Fergan... Sorry, I said Farron. Fergan. That Uncle Fergan had done a bad thing. But not to worry, as the nice men at the fort would make sure he was well looked after for all the years he stayed there. Lorelin laughed. I meant, what did you tell Neffin? Precisely the same. Well, not in exactly the same words, of course. Not only do they give me the satisfaction of refusing, but I've had no marriage proposals from House Marin since Fergan departed. That is an even better reason to keep the man tucked away in the fort. I had no idea. I don't know why, but I, for some reason, assumed that the High Lord was not allowed to have a relationship or get married or whatever. There is no basis for that. It is just my, like, weird sort of assigning him the role of, like, the priest of an abbey and behaving as if that's, you know, that him being solely focused on the good of the guild is what is expected of him. And that really doesn't make any sense. But yeah, it didn't even occur to me that he is a super powerful and ostensibly pretty good looking single man in a really influential position. And of course people are going to be trying to get in his pants to make alliances. Like, that just never even entered my head. And once I realized that, once I, like, stopped and thought about it, I went the extra mile and was like, oh man, you know what? I think that I was assuming, because we have a conversation a little bit later between Dannyl and this guy that he's never met, where Dannyl says that he is not actually gay, that it's just something that Fergan said because he knew that particular accusation would be the most effective in his conservative community, but that it's totally untrue. So that surprised me because, like I had said last episode, I just for some reason assumed that Dannyl was gay. And I'm realizing that I assumed Lorelin was gay too. So I'm just gaying up the place. And I don't know where I got that. I guess I just keep thinking that if somebody is, like, influential, at all attractive, not with somebody already, and not really seeming to, like, flirt or be interested at all, that they're just low-key gay and they just don't care because they're not able to really, like, do anything within society about that. So they just have to, like, live their life on the DL. So yeah, I mean, and to be fair, we don't really get Lorelin, or not Lorelin, we don't get Akkarin saying anything about whether or not he'd be interested in anybody anyway. So I may still be right about him. And that remains to be seen. Both Aaron and House Corrin have asked if we can spare healers to tend their racehorses, Akkarin said. Llewellyn gave a sigh of exasperation. You told them we can't, of course. Akkarin shrugged. I told them I'd think about it. There may be a way we can turn such a request to our advantage. But we need every healer we have. True, but both houses are inclined to hoard their daughters, as if they too were more valuable for breeding than anything else. There's a couple of random dogs that just ran through my yard. What's going on? Sorry guys, that was very distracting too. If they could be persuaded to let the girls who have talent join us, we would eventually have more than enough healers to replace those who leave to tend the horses. Now, this bothered me, and this is a really stupid, silly thing. But I'm sorry, I'm just so distracted by these fucking dogs that are in my yard for no reason. Why is it assumed, just straight up assumed, that any women are going to become healers? Because it's like, that just bums me out that that's the assumption, and that it seems to be true so much of the time, and that it is also true of Sonea. It appears to be so far. That's the aspect of magic that she has shown the most interest in and brightened up at the most. I feel like this is part of like a low-key misogynistic idea that women are the nurturers and we're more interested in helping other people achieve goals rather than being the warriors and doing that ourselves. And I can't tell from the way this is written whether or not that's supposed to be the attitude of the people in this world because they are too limited in their understanding, or if that's really genuinely the way things work for the female magicians. Because I want to think that it's supposed to be that they just think women are good for healing and that's kind of it. But having Sonea be the, POV character and a woman and interested in healing herself makes me feel like that's what the author is also saying. And I just find that irritating. So I just wanted to address that because I sort of let go of feeling annoyed about that just because I wanted to give the author the benefit of the doubt and it was easier to not think about it. But this conversation just shoved it back in my face again. I mean, Llewellyn says those girls might not choose to become healers when they graduate, but that's really a sort of afterthought. Like when he says that, it's just sort of like, well, all of the eggs may not hatch. Not like, well, they're free to become anything they choose and plenty of women do other stuff. It's more like, well, we just can't completely count on the thing that we usually know will happen to happen. So I don't know. This bugs me a little bit and I'm interested to see if that turns into anything later or if this really is like the attitude of the author bleeding through into this world. Because yes, Trudy Canavan is a woman. That does not mean that she is exempt from misogyny. Internalized misogyny is a hell of a drug and pops up all over the place. So let's see. So Akkarin says, well, yes, we must gain enough girls to ensure we eventually make up for the healers we send to tend the horses. Ultimately, we'll have more healers to call upon if there should be a disaster, such as a fire or riot. And then, let's see, where is it? There is another advantage. Lord Teppo spoke to me a few months ago about wishing to expand our knowledge of animal healing. He spoke quite persuasively. This might be a means for him to start his studies in the field. Llewellyn shook his head. It sounds like a waste of healer's time to me. Akkarin frowned. I will discuss both ideas with Lady Vinara. Do you have any news for me? And this is when Llewellyn has to tell Akkarin that he didn't order more of the wine that he loves so much because they want 20 gold a bottle. And Akkarin is just like, oh, Jesus. All right, you know what? Good call, buddy. That's ridiculous. Another good decision, though this time you should have mentioned it to me first. I could have said a few words here and there in court. Well, I still can. So I'll expect a more reasonable offer to arrive on my desk in the next few weeks? Akkarin smiled. I'll see what I can do. They sat in silence for a moment, then Lorland drained his glass and rose. I should move on to the night room. Are you coming? No, I have someone to meet in the city. He looked up at Lorland. It was good to see you again. Come by more often. I don't want to have to arrange meetings with you just to find out guild gossip. I will, but you should try the night room more often. You'll hear some gossip yourself. So they leave, and Lorland's thinking to himself as he's leaving about the fact that Akkarin seemed to approve of his choice in Dannyl, which is sort of ironic since the whole thing is that Dannyl's going to be spying. And Lorland was amazed at how Akkarin managed to allude to his secret activities during their conversations. My interests lie outside the confines of the guild. That was putting it mildly. Lorland snorted softly. No doubt Akkarin was referring to attending court and the king. I just can't help interpreting what he says in the light of what I know. Which, yeah, isn't that such a thing? You find out something about somebody and all of a sudden everything that they say, you're like, no, that's about this. Even though, like, that's clearly not true. But you feel like everything has to have two meanings once you realize somebody has a secret. So then we have chapter 5, where Sonea is taunted in front of the class by Regin, who steals her notes and starts to read them out loud so that everybody can hear how absurd her spelling and grammar is, which is really, that's something that, like, for me, as somebody who is inherently really good at English and grammar and spelling and all that stuff, like, I can be so brutal about that. And it's really classist of me, to be honest, because everybody doesn't get to have the same kind of education that I got. And everybody doesn't have the same talent for it. Like, it is a specific skill, and some people are just good at other things. But I always feel like, but if you just proofread it, and it's just not fair, because even proofreading, if you are the one person, if you don't have an editor at hand, you're going to proofread the thing that you wrote with your own understanding when you wrote it. So that doesn't mean that you're going to catch stuff. You have to know it's wrong to catch it in the first place. So I felt really bad during this section because I understand what Regin's mindset is here, because I can be this way and really snobby about it, and realizing that I've been really unfair to people in this way. And that is not to say that there aren't some people who still really deserve to be, like, completely drawn and quartered for how bad. Like, for example, Donald Trump's tweets. Those deserve it. I'm not sorry at all. But there are people that I should really know better and have more sympathy. And, you know, I have a close friend, actually, who is severely dyslexic. And I watched over the weekend as somebody sort of, like, teased him because he was spelling things out on a screen and spelling them wrong. And they didn't know. And he finally said something about being dyslexic, and they still didn't, like, back off about it. And it bothered me. Like, but, you know, I realized, like, how many people have I sort of low-key made fun of that maybe had this issue and I didn't know it and nobody said. So this bummed me out because it felt like I was being called out specifically, even though I know that wasn't the point. And it's just, the whole thing is a really, like, ugly scene because she's trying to act like it doesn't bother her, but it obviously does. And this is the scene where, and I feel like I'm behind here in talking because I'm at 43 minutes and I feel like I still have, no, I'm all right. I think I'll be able to. But they're given an assignment as a class that they have to light candles. And she lights her candle, like, immediately. Like, the teacher's still in the middle of trying to explain how to do it to her when she does it. And he's like, oh, right. So he gives her another assignment while the other students are still working on their candles. And it's this ball. It's basically a remembrall is how I think of it, filled with, like, blue liquid. And if she infuses it with the right temperature, the color will change. And he'll know that she was able to do something really even and controlled. And he gives this to her and walks away as if this is going to be such a challenge that he trusts he can leave her by herself with it for a while. But she manages to do it almost immediately. Good, I have another exercise for you. As he returned to the box, she saw Regin watching her. A smile pulled at her lips again, and she saw his hands clenched. So Regin, BT Dubs, tries to light his candle and instead melts it, and it sprays all over him, which is great, and I love it. So yeah, Regin's really pissy because she's obviously better at magic than him. Like, as far as the fact that he was able to lock that door, which I'm sure he thought was very impressive, it turns out that she's actually, like, plenty better than him. Or at least better at summoning it when she really needs it versus him when he really wants it. So we have Dannyl, and, like, I'm not really going to talk about Dannyl's travels too much because nothing really has happened there yet in terms of, I'll talk about it when he arrives at the city and meets some people, but when it comes to the actual voyage, it's just, him sort of chumming with the different crew members who like him better than they expect to. The captain, says something about how it was an honor to transport you, and Dannyl says, "It was an honor riding with you, Captain Numo. Sail well." Numo's eyes widened slightly in surprise. He bowed stiffly, then strode away. Jano grinned. "He like you. Magicians not try to be polite our way." Dannyl nodded. That didn't surprise him. So he gets picked up by, and I like this crew too. I hope we see them again because they all seem like genuinely to be like decent dudes. He gets picked up by a really good-looking young man in sort of tight-fitting, fashionable clothing named Tyend. Tyend of Tremolin. And Tyend is going to be sort of the guy, his go-to guy, I think, because he works at the Great Library. So he's a really good connection because this is the place that Akkarin was going all the time when he was on his travels. And Dannyl mentions, where is it, Tyend? Oh, Tyend's actually the one that brings it up. I found that most magicians appreciate books in a way that most courtiers never do. Your High Lord spent many weeks there once, long before he became High Lord, of course. Dannyl looked at the young man, his pulse quickening. Did he really? What could have interested him so much? All sorts of things, Tyend replied, his eyes bright. I was his assistant for some days. Irand, the head librarian, couldn't keep me out of the library when I was a boy, so he employed me to fetch and carry. Lord Akkarin read all the oldest books. He was looking for something, but I never found out exactly what it was. It was such a mystery. One day he didn't arrive at his usual time, or the next day, so we asked after him. He had packed up and left all of a sudden. How interesting, Dannyl mused. I wonder if he had found what he was looking for. So that's a really good connection to have. Somebody that not only works for the place that you need to check out, but somebody who was with the High Lord when he was there. So yeah, I feel like Tyend is going to be pretty important to Dannyl's investigation. So let's see. Tyend had met and assisted Akkarin 10 years before. Lorlin had arranged for the scholar to meet him. Coincidence? He doubted it. Lorlin obviously intended for Dannyl to enlist Tyend's help for his research into ancient magic. So we have Lorlin, and he's meeting with some distant family relatives who tell him about some shit in the city because their kid is trying to be part of the guard. He's sure he'll be promoted to captain next year, but right now he's patrolling the streets. So he has information about cases that are going on. And the recent murders are enough to make even the bravest man lock his doors at night. Murders? You haven't heard? Daryl's eyebrows rose. Why, the whole city's in a stir about them. Lorlin shook his head. I might have been told, but events in the guild have occupied my mind lately. I haven't paid much attention to city matters. You should poke your head out of that place more often, Daryl said disapprovingly. I'm surprised you haven't taken an interest in this. They say it's the worst set of murders seen in the city for over 100 years. So, this thing is really intense. A woman witnessed one of the murders 2 nights ago. She had been packing clothes away when she heard her employer struggling with a stranger. When she realized the pair was coming into the room, she hid inside a cupboard. She said that the stranger tied up her employer, then took out a knife and cut off his shirt. He made small cuts on the man's body, 5 on each shoulder. Darryl splayed his fingers over his shoulder. Those cuts are how the guard knows it's the same man doing the murders. The woman said the murderer placed his fingers over the cuts and started chanting under his breath. When he had finished whatever he was saying, he cut the man's throat. The servant said something else, that she thought the man was dead before his throat was cut. Barron says the cut on the man's shoulders weren't enough to kill anybody, and there was no sign of poison. I think he decided the man passed out. I'd be half dead with fright myself. Are you all right, Lorelyn? Yeah. So, wow. This is way, like, you know, when we had that other chapter end and he's like, it is done. I'm thinking, like, there's somebody that I need to kill that needs to be out of the way, and I'm going to go take care of it, even though I know that nobody's going to approve of it because this just needs to happen. And I mean, he comes back and says to his servant, I need your strength. And so I assumed that he was, like, depleted from having done something that I guess I assumed, like, the you know, murders he was out there committing were not connected to the black magic. That the black magic was something that he utilized in order to commit the murders. Does that make sense? And instead, what it seems like is that he's going out and cutting into people's shoulders in just the right position so that he can have his fingers over each cut, and then drawing the power out of them. Now, let's keep in mind that we do not know for sure that the person doing this is Akkarin. It's circumstantial. It could be that Akkarin is out there trying to track down the person that he knows is doing this and defends himself, and then comes back and is forced to employ some of that same magic, but on a willing participant and not enough to kill that participant in order to replenish his strength to simply function. This is very much giving him the benefit of the doubt, though. Like, all signs point to Akkarin is going out into the city at night and killing innocent people in order to summon power from them, which begs the question, how does he pick who he kills? Because this was not an opportunistic attack in an alley. He broke into somebody's house, into the house of someone who had servants, so potential witnesses and people interfering. That's a big risk to take. And I feel like the only reason to do that is because you know that this person may have some magic and you need to take it. So, yikes. That's pretty bad. That's intense. And poor Lorelyn, like, finding this out. I mean, he already had to play it cool with so much effort. And I can't imagine, knowing this in addition to everything, how much harder that's going to be for him. Like, the poor baby. So chapter 6 begins with poor Sonea coming back to her rooms, and Rothan's there and sees that she's once again gotten food all over her because they're taunting her and, like, messing with her. And she has to wash, and she's going to, like, go out dressed without her robes. And he's like, no, you can't go out. You can't go to class like that. And she says, well, I don't have any clean ones left unless you can dry the ones that are wet for me. And she says, well, I can do it myself, but I'm not supposed to do any magic unless, and Rothan interrupts and says, instructed by a magician. That rule is a flexible one, Sonea. Generally, it's understood that if a teacher instructs you to practice what he taught you, you're free to do it outside of class unless he says otherwise. So she does manage to dry off her robes pretty easily while she's chatting with him. So her magic's, like, really coming along here. And then she brings up that he said once an exceptional novice can be moved to a higher class. What would it take for me to do that? Rothan's eyebrows rose. A lot of work. You may be well practiced at using magic, but your knowledge and understanding of it would need much improvement. So, is it possible? Yes, he said slowly. If we work every night and free day, you might pass the half-year tests in a month or so. But the hard work wouldn't stop there. Once you had advanced, you would need to catch up with the winter novices. If you fail the first-year test, she'll drop back down to the summer class again. That means you'd have to work very hard for 2 or 3 months. I understand, Sonea bit her lip. I want to try it. And finally, when because he says like, well, you said you wanted to wait for the other kids. She's like, fuck them. They're not worthwhile. And then he says, all right, but I do have to point out the next class might not be any better. And she says, well, I don't think they're going to like me, but I have watched them and they don't have a ringleader like Regin. So I think they'll just leave me alone. Even though they don't like me, it won't be the way it is in this class. Which, good for you, Sonea. Like, this never even occurred to me that this was an option. And I think it's a really smart course of action. Sometimes you just need to find, like, there are certain people that there's no meeting them halfway. There's no, like, convincing them that you're a human being who deserves to be treated like a human being. There are some people who just, you have to get away from them. And I think that's 100% the right call here. And he tells her also that he's going to teach her how to make a shield around herself to prevent the kinds of, like, attacks and pranks that have been played on her over the past week, which I wish he had thought of a little sooner, but okay. So he teaches her how to, like, basically what it is that your skin is like a magical boundary that a magician can't just, like, basically magically reach inside your body and rip your heart out. Unlike in Dresden Files, evidently. And the fact that your skin ends obviously on your body means that in order to get a protective shield that's further out, you have to project the boundary from your skin out from around you as if you're sort of inflating yourself, which is such a weird idea that I really like. So he demonstrates the general idea using light that's not actually a real shield that would, defend him in any way, but it's just a sort of visual example of how it works and gets her to copy. And she manages to do it. Like, there's holes in it. It collapses a little in certain places. It's like, but she really is very quick to pick this up. So that's encouraging. And I'm hopeful that, Regin will do something to fuck with her, that her shield will come into play. And then he'll try and, like, whine about how she's using magic outside, and she can be like, my guardian instructed me to practice, and he'll just have no fucking leg to stand on. So Rothan is thinking to himself after she leaves about the fact that he had thought Sonea would do better with friends than she has, and is reflecting the teachers had not taken a liking to her either, despite her exceptional abilities. Tales of knifings and childhood thieving were circulating, according to Rothan's elderly friend, Yalden. The teachers could not neglect her education, however. He could make sure of that. So, yeah, that's a real danger that, like, if the teachers don't like her, that they'll somehow just sort of let her flounder. So thank God that she has Rothan on her side. And also, I just do want to mention that, like, the tales of knifings and childhood thievery, like, it could be argued that she should not have told the truth when she was asked about her past and whether she had ever stolen and whether she had ever hurt anybody. But I really understand her impulse there in telling the truth and hoping that they will understand, because in your own mind, when you go through something that other people haven't gone through, it's so clear to you that you didn't have a choice, and that your situation, there were so many extenuating circumstances that can't necessarily be told within that story. So people will be like, well, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? And it's like all of these other factors that people throw at you as if you never considered those, when of course you have. It's just that you lived that experience. And so you knew all the reasons that those other options would not work. And they, having not lived that life, have no understanding of that. And so act like they figured out the answer and you couldn't possibly have needed to do what you did. And it's a really common thing to see, like, amongst people who are, like, a little bit more privileged in terms of money. They don't understand what it's like to be broke. And so anytime somebody who has less money is looking for help, but also doing something to make themselves happier by spending some of that money on a completely non-essential item that's held up as like, well, if you were so poor, how could you afford this? Or I myself, when like, it was just a few months ago, or not a few months ago, it was a couple years ago when I first was doing Unspoiled full time and I was really broke. And I posted, which purse should I get? Posted 2 pictures of purses on my Facebook, and they were really cheap $15 purses, but you couldn't see the price in the screenshots that I used. And I said something at another point about being broke, and a friend of mine messaged me and was like, you may want to be careful about posting that kind of stuff, because somebody said, well, how bad can she really be doing if she's buying a new purse? I was making like $1,200 a month at the time, which, I mean, come on. And the purse was $15. I'm not allowed to just buy a new purse for $15 without somebody having something to say about it. But no, I'm not, because these people don't understand what this is like. And it's really like, you feel like the only way to get them to understand is to tell them your whole life story, which is frankly none of their business. And maybe they should just learn that they don't know everything. But the problem with people like that is that they really believe that if you're in a bad position, it's probably your own fault. And there's not really much to be said when somebody has that sort of perspective, you know? So I'm really over time here, but there's not much left to talk about. We have Dannyl getting in touch with Rothan with their mental conversation, and him, you know, quickly telling Rothan what's going on, but he doesn't tell him about the secret mission, of course. And Rothan telling him about Sonea being picked on, which immediately Dannyl has a lot of sympathy for, because he knows what that's like. And then we have Akkarin, who is, I guess, one of the representatives, the first ambassador, that's what he is, who is taking Dannyl to meet the king for the first time. And it's a really opulent, beautiful place, obviously. There is a bard in there that's like messing with them, and Dannyl has a sort of weird reaction where he says, like, I find him funny, but I'm not really sure why. And Akkarin says he practices the art of flattery with the aim to insult. Just ignore him, unless, of course, you do find him entertaining. I do, though I'm not sure why. You'll get over it. He wants, and then they get cut off, and I was like, he wants what? He wants what? Like, I just really wanted to know what happened. So Dannyl has to go and, like, kneel to the king, which he finds really, like, uncomfortable to do, even though he realizes that people bow to him all the time and that he's kind of a hypocrite here. It's a brief conversation with the king, just greeting him, asking him how his journey was, and just like getting to see him and know who he is and recognize him. And when he goes out and meets with everybody in the chambers after, they are all weirdly excited to meet him in a way that makes him think that, oh, fuck, these people like might know some of the old rumors about me that I really didn't think were going to, first of all, make it all the way out here. And second of all, I didn't think they'd matter now. It's been like 20 fucking years. But apparently it does. So he gets stopped by Dem Aggaralin. Dem Aggaralin. I hope I'm saying that right. Do not be alarmed, my friend, because he asks Dannyl straight up, basically, are you gay? And his tone was hopeful. Dannyl feels like he wants to just be like, fucking no, okay? But then he realizes that he is in danger of offending this guy and that he probably shouldn't just like make enemies right here. And I like this whole, let's see. The anger and bitterness he'd once felt towards Fergan for circulating such rumors had faded since the warrior had been punished for blackmailing Sonea. Dannyl considered how he should reply, and then he finally says, I think I know the rumor you refer to. It seems I will never shake that one, though it's been 15 years since it started. The guild, as you must know, is very conservative, which is why the novice who'd circulated that rumor knew it would cause me difficulties with my peers. He was prone to making up all manners of stories about me. I see. Well, please forgive me for bringing up a painful subject. We had wondered about that one as well, since the one who denounces loudest is often the most likely. And I was like, oh shit, true. That never occurred to me, but maybe Fergan's gay. Like, I don't know if you guys saw in the news recently, but there was a guy who was like the head preacher or minister or something for like a gay conversion therapy camp. And he was trolling Grindr for dates, like very recently. And by dates, I mean hookups. But yeah, it just came out like a day or two ago. And so while I'm not always a big fan of like the people who are the most homophobic, or like that theory all like makes me feel weirdly like it's in itself sort of like too assumptive, it does seem to be true frequently. So I think Dem might be sort of right about that. But Dem finally leaves when Tayend joins up with him. And Tyen's about to like warn Dannyl, hey, by the way, that guy. And Dannyl's like, no, I know, it's fine. And Tyen's like, and even if you were gay, like here, it's just really not a big deal. Like people wouldn't care the same way. But I'm surprised that you don't seem more angry at him for bringing this up to you. And Dannyl says, when you've spent half your life denying such rumors, you come to sympathize with the kind of person you're claimed to be. To have inclinations that are unacceptable and to have to either deny them or undertake elaborate measures to hide them would be a terrible way to live. So I like that being accused of this, even though it's not true that he's gay, has given him a lot of sympathy for people who are and have to deal with this kind of garbage all the time and then lie about who they are. He's trying to get the truth out that he's not. And that's frustrating enough. But what if you're accused and it's true, and then you just have to pretend to be somebody else? So I liked that about Dannyl, that rather than become really homophobic as a result of this, it's actually made him more sympathetic and compassionate about the whole thing. So guys, I'm way over time. I'm sorry, but these were really good chapters. So this was a lot of fun. And I think there's already scheduled the next one. So let me just double check and see when that's going to be. And thank you again to Ashleigh for commissioning these. So let's see. The next one is going to be on Wednesday of next week, the 14th. So yeah, there's going to be a lot happening. I'm excited though that I get to read more so soon, and that I know that I get to read more. And I'm going to be scheduling the week the week before December begins, the last week of November, I think a couple more Parable of the Sowers. So stay tuned for those, because as I said, somebody had purchased like a blank check and I just haven't been able to fit them in the schedule yet. So yeah, if you're interested in Parable, keep an eye out, because I'm going to be working more on that too. All right, everybody. Well, thank you all so much for listening. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.